We have come quite far on our journey. We have clear strategic priorities, metrics, targets, but more importantly, we created a strong culture of sustainability within the company.
Hello and welcome to the CSO Impact Podcast, where we talk to leaders in sustainability. We're discussing how we can work in a way that makes a positive impact on the planet. I'm your host, Harald Neidhardt, and in this episode, we talk to Linda Freiner. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer of Zurich Insurance Group. And we talked to her in Zurich with snow this morning. Linda, thanks so much for being here with us in the studio. How are you today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm doing great today. You mentioned that this is a winter day in Zurich, and it's probably the first of a few, which I hope to come.
That might be already one of the topics talking about the weather, the climate, and changing situations. Now, Linda was also one of our special honors of the first CSO Award for Europeans, top 100 CSOs, last January in Davos. And so congratulations, and so great to have you here with us. Let's talk maybe first about the role of yourself within Zurich Insurance Group. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the company and what kind of initiatives are you currently working on at the moment?
Yeah, so Zurich Insurance is a global insurance company. We're present in over 200 countries and territories. We serve both retail customers and commercial customers, and we offer life and property and casualty insurance. So we're really a global company offering all sorts of insurance solutions. I think the initiatives that have been taking up, I would say, almost my entire last year is really our climate transition plan that we published in September. And I always most characterize it as my third child, because that's the way that it felt. We're, of course, also in full swing of integrating CSRD reporting frameworks, as well as preparing for our approach to nature and biodiversity risk. And I think finally, in the beginning of next year, we will then review our strategic framework, which we do every 3 years, and make potential adjustments to priorities and metrics and the way forward.
So that's already a plate full of initiatives, of course. Maybe we can dig deeper there a little bit, because the insurance sector, if you will, is also one of the key, maybe not drivers, but heavily affected also by climate change. We see that from these, last events, whether we're in Spain or Brazil or all around the world, in Germany, even in Switzerland, I think also. There's so many catastrophes where insurance obviously come into play. So that means there's probably new kind of models that you have to, arbitrate, or there's a word for that, to discuss and set up how the business works in the future. You're actually dealing with futures all the time. So maybe just for the last couple of years, maybe, and going forward, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen so far? So, and maybe what are you expecting in the next year or two, just for the industry itself, and then maybe where Zurich sits in that? A long question.
I think it's a great question, because traditionally the insurance sector has focused a lot on the physical impacts of climate risk. I mean, we've been using catastrophic risk models to estimate different natural hazards such as windstorms, flood, or precipitation for over 100 years. And this is, of course, this data has been key to set a price on the impacts of climate change. But what we see is, of course, in recent years, there was an increase in the intensity of these hazards. And that's an important piece of the puzzle. However, the big change that I see is that we're now starting to look more at transition risks linked to climate change. We are running climate risk scenario assessments on our investments, underwriting, and also our operations to estimate the future impact of over a longer time horizon, so looking into the future. We're also, as I mentioned in the beginning, developing climate transition plans where we put a focus on how can we better understand the transition of the real economy, and how can we support our customers and the companies that we invest in with products and services or capital to support their transition. But if I look a bit into the future, I think there's still a big discrepancy between how serious European insurance companies are taking this and changing their focus versus the rest of the world, despite many global initiatives such as the UN Principles of Sustainable Insurance.
I think that's probably, and if you may, or if I may, I would like to stay there because maybe with the geopolitics, you are a global company. You might even have a couple of, let's say, buildings insured in Miami, and how do you say it? The local, the geopolitics of the USA. And or hurricane season and so on. So not only the, let's say, political framework, but the risk of being in Miami. And then there's more and more people going, and it's a little bit of an oxymoron. Now, does an insurance company, and I know you don't have to talk about your specific company, but it has to change the market, right? So that either the premiums go up and or you might retract from certain countries because risks are too high. And that's a huge risk for some of the countries and people who might be no longer be able to be assured. There's one term in Germany for like a total insurance, or there's something where you can really say, okay, everything is insured. And so these kind of, let's say, how does this play out? If you see the risk, you play these scenarios, and you must follow Rockström and all the others. Say, okay, we might be in a 3 or 4 degree scenario in I don't know how many years. So that is really, really very vital to your survival or to your business strategy. How do you? Can you comment on this?
So I think every decision that we make is a risk-based decision.
Yeah.
And we are there to price the risk. And when the risk is too high, it's no longer insurable.
Yes.
But what needs to happen then is to work on lowering the risk of investing in adaptation and resilience. So that was very important for us when we put together our climate transition plan, not just talk about the decarbonization, because the reality is we control very little emissions. Our operations are buildings, offices, a bit of fleet and some air travel, but it's still a very, very small portion. So how can we actually positively impact our customers in the way that they transition? And there, absolutely, resilience and adaptation is a key piece to be able to continue to ensure that the world is insurable. So that we will see more. And I think the other piece is actually climate risk still remains very local. In the current warming scenarios that we have, it's devastating, and I said it's increasing in intensity, but it remains very local. So when you pool the risk, of course, you can, in a global setting, you can still make sure that you make the adjustment needed. But absolutely, we need to invest much, much more in mitigation and adaptation.
And so the end of 2000 or the end of the year, there was the COP, discussions on the political level, which are very slow. And sometimes you might think that maybe 2030 is, coming so soon, but maybe the politicians are not ready to set up all the frameworks. Now, that's why corporates and your role within the corporate are, in my mind, so vital to say, okay, we might already preempt some of the coming frameworks. There's enough policies to deal with CSRD and so on. But can you describe a little bit more the transition plan? What this is? So who is it for? And maybe what are one or two of the key points in there?
So first of all, I think yes, I absolutely agree with you. Actually, we have regulation today in Europe, but that is, of course, impacting non-European based companies to develop transition plans. And I think this is excellent. I mean, it started already in UK in 2023, actually in Switzerland this year, but with very little guidance on what they should look like. And then together with the CSRD and CSDDD, we have to have that in place. And I think that's the most strategic exercise that a company can go through. And I really think it's important that the companies take it seriously. But then again, if we look at countries, they're not required to have transition plans in most parts of the world. So it is a bit of an oxymoron in that sense that the corporate sector are pushed, but governments can just continue doing what they do. So for us, it was really important to take that opportunity with the transition plan to really define the role of insurance in the transition. Because, as I said earlier, from a decarbonization perspective, we can decarbonize our scope 1 and 2 and 3 in operations quite easily in the global context, but it's very hard for us to impact global emissions. And actually, we are only going to become a net zero company if the companies we invest and we insure are net zero. And that was also, of course, something we were very conscious about when we set our net zero commitment in 2019 and now really starting to execute on it. So the plan is really trying to define what can we do in terms of decarbonization, engaging with customers, engaging with companies, provide solutions. What can we do from a resilience perspective, as I mentioned? First of all, integrate more resilience insights into the underwriting process, risk-based, again, approach, but they're also providing more resilience advisory services to our customers. But then the third piece is probably the most important one. We also need to advocate for public policy change. Because again, and you mentioned it, I've mentioned it, it's going too slow from a regulatory perspective. And if the real economy is going to have to be able to transition, we're going to have to get more incentives in that space. And then fourth, of course, also we need to continue in the work in our operations, lowering our emissions, making sure that we upskill and we create a culture of sustainability in the company. And that's something we've been working very, very hard in the past few years. So I think that sums it up quite quickly, what we've been working on.
So maybe we talk a little bit about your role and your position as a CSO in the company. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you land this position, or where you sit right now? What came before to where you are?
There's definitely been a before, because I started developing a passion for the role of the private sector in society already when I was in business school. And at the time, there wasn't any sustainability courses or anything in this field. There was some research about CSR, but it wasn't really addressing what I was looking for. But I anyway decided to write my master thesis about the commitment of a Swedish bank to support environmental and social issues in society. So that was quite new. But after business school, I went on to do pretty regular jobs in finance and consulting, but I was missing a stronger purpose with what I was doing. So that led me to the World Economic Forum, who I found really interesting, because much of the focus was to bring together many different sectors in society, work on large societal issues. So I got to work with many different organizations. I learned what issues were of importance to them and how they're trying to tackle it. So through this work, I got introduced to Zurich, who had just started their corporate responsibility strategy. And they looked for somebody to set up one of the flagship programs around flood resilience, back to the adaptation and resilience perspective. So this provided me with an opportunity to get a hands-on experience of how does this actually work in a company more practically. And I also managed to in this flood resilience program, to bring together different sectors in a new type of partnership where everybody had to contribute with their unique experience and solve problems together. And I remember that this partnership setup was awarded something called the UNFCCC Momentum for Change Lighthouse Award at COP20. And this was because of this innovative approach. And we hadn't really gotten going yet. So the expectations was very high in terms of where we needed to go. So, but then, fast forward, when my predecessor left Zurich in 2016, I threw my hat into the ring to succeed her, and I eventually got the role, but I was very terrified of the big shoes that I had to fill, because she had really put in place the basic framework from when we have then built on today. But at the same time, there was also so much changes going on, both inside and outside of the company, that really would help me turn sustainability into a key transformation theme for Zurich. So now, 8 years later, we have come quite far on our journey. We have clear strategic priorities, metrics, targets. But more importantly, we created a strong culture of sustainability within the company, which helps us whenever we're getting a new topic thrown at us that we need to deliver on.
I think culture is a fantastic point to maybe also deep dive a little bit in there, because I feel sometimes, or in my anecdotal stories, I say, okay, there's Sarah, and she is the CSO, and we put her in a room. Let's deal with all the reporting, but basically don't come out until there's a real big question. And then Sarah goes to all of the department and asks, "Oh, I need this number, I need this." And so whenever that person comes around, it's like, "Oh, she wants something, and it's something maybe not, which is on my bonus is not aligned with that." And who needs? Can we not just start in 2029? Because I heard this whole thing is only in 2030. So internal either resentment and or positive culture is so important. So I'm really curious how you started it, or how you deal, obviously, in orchestration with everybody else. What's your role in this culture, and maybe one or two of the ideas that really were successful, maybe, or challenging?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think there's plenty of both of those. Look, one thing that has really helped me on this journey is that we are a risk management company. So we manage risk, and therefore we have to be very aware and know different types of risk. So for us, when we started to look at environmental, social, and governance issues, it was quite easy to sell that, to say, well, actually, not only we need to manage the short-term risk, but we also have to manage the long-term risk. But this journey, and I really pinpoint on the word journey, takes time. And that's something I think we sometimes forget in the fast changing world. Look, I spent a year of trying to really clarify what I meant about talking about sustainability instead of corporate responsibility, and how different it was. And it took a time to just set the strategic priorities. And then actually in the first strategic cycle that we were in, we weren't setting any targets because it was just too new. It was just too far away from for people. And then in the second cycle, we decided, okay, now we need to set the first targets, and we need to get it on the target cards, and we need to make sure that it's integrated into business performance processes and so on. So I think that's really the key piece of it. And really, as I said, we worked a lot on the culture. So in the beginning, it was a lot about our operations, getting rid of plastics and printers and everything that people could see, because then they could understand, well, actually, we're serious about this. This is not just something that we're talking about. And another thing was also Zurich, when I stepped in, was also going through generally a transformation journey. So it was easier to also place sustainability as one of those transformation themes. That if you want to turn around a company, that you put that long-term lens on everything that you do. Was also extremely important. But of course, there's been challenges, and I honestly think that sustainability is always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I do always celebrate that 1 step forward that you make, because you're really asked to run before you can walk on many, many things. You're writing processes as you have to execute on them, compared to other business functions where most of the processes and approaches are already in place for many, many years.
I think in your role, as far as I see it, that you let's say there's classical CSOs who just deal with the business they're in, selling a widget and making that as sustainable, green as possible, and the whole scope 1, 2, 3. You are in the business similar to maybe banks, where the industry itself can play a vital role in changing and help us to reach desirable futures. Are you how closely are you working with sort of the product side or the offering actually of the company? Because you could have a very inward focus, but I think from how you describe yourself and the view, it's very much holistic. How could you describe that?
I think it's very closely linked to Badoo. As I said, we are a risk management company, so we sell risk advisory services. We sell risk transfer products. So we have to be knowing the risk very well. So of course, first of all, we're looking at what are the developments in the world. We have a very strong sustainability risk radar. We understand what's going on. We, of course, closely engaging with our customers to understand, okay, what technologies are they developing? What types of insurance solutions do they need? And how can we get comfortable with that technology? So this is core to really, if I look at our transition plan in terms of that engagement piece, because we traditionally like to know risk really well before we insure it. So we have to be early on in that process. And I think actually one of the I find the most fulfilling is actually to be out there with customers and understand their challenges and what they're expecting from us. That is really one of the highlights of my job.
Within the time of your company, what is maybe some of the biggest achievements that you can tell us about? What is a cool project or initiative that you like to share?
Wow, I mean, there are a few. I think one of the early wins I remember when we became an industry leader in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And this was really because actually us being thrown out of the Dow Jones in 2011 was the first wake-up call for the company to look at this more seriously. So then coming back in and a few years later, we're actually in the top rating. Now we've stopped doing that since, because we think there are better ways to measure a company's sustainability performance. But at the time, it was really the way. I'm also extremely proud of our transition plan, as I mentioned. I think this is really a tremendous work, and it needs require a really good effort. But then, of course, also just the general integration of sustainability into the business processes, into the strategic priorities, into the business performance processes, into the reward and remuneration structure. So there's plenty of things that I can think back of one day when I sit there on my rocking chair.
Yes. And when you sit on your rocking chair, looking back, what was maybe one of a tougher challenge that you had to crack or face in your career?
I think the biggest challenge by far, and it's not going to be over in the short term, is really combining family and professional life. I think most corporate jobs today are highly demanding because both of the fast pace, but also the connected world that we live in, and it consumes a lot of energy. And at the same time, raising a young family, living far away from your regions where grandparents and other family could be of a great support is not the situation that I've been in. But that's a choice I've made. So I try to prioritize my health through exercise and good nutrition, but I rarely find time for proper recovery. So that is definitely so. Even though I'm a very competitive person, I thrive on adrenaline. I need to be very, very careful in terms of how I manage my energy to make sure that I can actually do this work properly.
I think that is great for you to say that and describe it, because I think this combination, I'm a big fan or advocate of the inner development goals, so that, we have to look also within to go also to the all sustainability development goals and all of the achievements. I think that's, I'm glad you mentioned that and how tough it is. We see how many CSOs or people in sustainability, or you might even call them corporate activists if you say, all right, you have to, in some tougher environments, maybe, especially, in some hard to abate industries, for example, then this inner conflict is so hard on some people, and we see fluctuations and so on. So thank you for sharing that. What would you say are maybe some of the characteristics and skills that a CSO must have? So if we're looking at, new young people are going in, looking at, let's say, joining a role where they can be active within their purpose mission, what are some of the skills in leadership that you think are maybe even more important for the role of the CSO? What makes a good leader in sustainability?
Well, I think I would summarize it probably down to three aspects. One is perseverance. I mean, I mentioned this one step forward, one step back. If you are a person that gives up easy when things get hard, then the CSO job is definitely not for you. The other piece is also linked to what I said is resilience. When you're trying to drive change, and I really say drive change. So I think activists, it's easier to be an activist because then you can kind of complain about things and point fingers at people. But actually, when you're a change agent, you actually have to drive change. And you're not going to be liked by everyone. And you're going to have to accept that it's fine to be questioned, that your decisions are questioned, your direction. And this has been one of my biggest learnings, that you have to build a strong resilience, not only to the workload, the changing expectations, but also how you will get pushed back when there are competing priorities and they become too many, and it's very hard for people to navigate between all those priorities that a company need to tackle. I think the last piece, you do need to have an optimism, because when your work focusing on all these global challenges, whenever I see your pin with the sustainability goals. If I try to explain that to my mom, I think she's wondering what this is all about, because and all these problems you just cannot solve on your own, and it's really too easy to get overwhelmed and depressed. And so you have to be optimistic about the human nature and what we're capable of solving if we really put our minds to it. So it's actually getting people to put their minds on this.
Do you think that sometimes maybe a CSO is too much under the scrutiny? We know that, activists or other, and we all are in sustainability. We are the first ones who cannot fly anymore. We all want to reduce and so on and so forth. But in a way, sometimes the CSO must be the most holy person within the corporation or in the industry. It's how do you, is that something unfair, or how would you say it?
I I think you absolutely have to be a role model, but you have to make sure that also you live in a system that is not set up to actually change very fast. So of course I get the comment from people, I bike to work this morning, or I really like eating vegetarian and things like that. And you just have to. I think it's part of the role, and you just have to. You have to be very transparent and honest in who you are and what you believe in.
Some people describe the CSO as a chief sustainability orchestrator, because you have, let's say, in some companies, you have the first violin, and you have a strong pianist, and there's a whole brass segment working together. I don't know, brotherhoods or something like that. So, do you think there's something to it? Can you identify where you're like, okay, I have to kind of play with everybody, see their strengths, but somehow bring them on a mission? It's probably coming back to the culture aspect we talked about.
Culture as well. I think you also need to like people, and a stakeholder management is super important. And you have to be able to listen to people, and you have to be able to understand what drives them, what motivates them, how can you help them in their work. And so that's it. I think it's a really good, really important skill, that you're able to really perceive what's going on around you, and also that you listen, and that you make people feel that they can contribute to everything, and that 1 + 1 is bigger than 2 in the end.
We're Future IO. We look into the future. What kind of future? And you look into risk also scenarios in the future. How do you see the role of the CSO evolve over the next 5 years, maybe?
I think it will continue to evolve. Of course, I hope that it's going to become a more important strategic position, because the reality is that social issues are going to continue to increase in impact to the economy and to companies. So I think it needs to be part of the strategic discussions at the executive level, and not be hidden in a communications or a compliance team. I don't agree with the camp of some CSOs that says, I want to work myself out of a job, because I do think we're always going to need somebody that coordinates and orchestrates, as you said, these efforts across an organization. I mean, similar to the job of an innovation or strategy or technology officer, it's still going to be needed to keep that big strategic 360 view of what's going on in the world and inside of the company.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, we know from your description the role of the CSO is super complex, but what gets you out in the morning? What are you really excited about? And maybe looking into the new year, we're into a new year 2025, but before this decade is out is less than 5 years, where we have a huge milestone 2030 to be within our planetary boundaries and all of that. So with all of these things, what are you excited about to thrive in your role?
So I love problem solving. So I like that I get to work on these big, hairy issues, but I also know that I can't solve it alone. So I have to work with other people as well. And then I love the fact that we still have a lot of young people that are really passionate about this topic, that want to come and work for companies that are leading in this space. And that also motivates me. When somebody comes up to me and really said, wow, I'm so impressed by the work of Zurich and what's happening, and how can I contribute? So that's really what keeps me going, and making sure, and also that you see a change, not just solving the problem, but that you see a change over the years and the efforts that you put in.
I think a good point what you say is about the young people, the next generation. So if you had a tip for somebody who is maybe just at university and saying, where should I land? Should I be in a corporate? Should I be looking into policy in sustainability, or should I work for an NGO in a foreign country? All of these are valuable propositions. What would you suggest to somebody to understand maybe what could be interesting to work within the corporate environment, the third sector, and maybe 1 or 2 tips that they should be prepared when they get into the house and the journey?
There's so many. Look, I think, first of all, you have to be passionate about something. As I said in the beginning of my career, I tried to do things that didn't really passion me, and I wasn't probably very good at it. So to really understand what are the things that drives you, and if there are particular topics. I think that's not very common. That is very early on. And then I do think it's important that you try to work in a couple of different sectors. Because many organizations work so differently. So I said I worked in partnership setups with academia, private sector, not-for-profit, NGO sector. So you have to learn that. And then I think last but not least, don't be a perfectionist. There's so many things that you cannot control, so you just have to go with it, and just stick with what you know, and also don't be afraid of actually taking space and making sure that you get to say something at the table.
Thank you so much for these refreshing tips, for the insights into your daily work, and really this kind of optimistic, positive view with all of the risks to be aware of what's around us. I think it's really, really, refreshing to see that, again, you're such an exemplary human in your role to lead this change, and I applaud you for that. So thank you, Linda, for the time. Thank you for the insights, and I really thank everybody to listen to our podcast, the CSO Impact Podcast. Thank you, Linda, for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.